So today we're actually going to combine section 1 and section 2 together. In section 1, we're going to be talking about inductive reasoning. So we're going to combine sections 1 and 2 together. So from section 1, you're going to get the definition of what a conjecture is. And a conjecture is an unproven statement that's going to be based on an observation. And then the process, so inductive reasoning, is going to be a process that includes looking for patterns and then making a conjecture. So for example, if I ask you to complete this sequence or this pattern of numbers, and I wrote 2, 4, 6, and 8, you can look at the pattern and you can make a conjecture and tell me what the next number in my pattern is going to be. And if you notice, they're all increasing by 2, so your conjecture would be that the next number in the pattern is a 10. So this is what is covered in section 1, is I would give you a pattern. It could be a sequence of numbers. It could be a picture. And you're going to come up with a conjecture to complete the pattern. All right, so here's our first example. We have a pattern here. We have figure 1, and notice it has 2 sections that it's divided into. Then figure 2 has 4, and then figure 3 has 6. It wants us to draw the fourth one. So we're going to draw a fourth circle. And they want us to complete the pattern. So can anybody figure out what is going on here? What's the pattern? What's changing?
There's 2 more spaces increasing only 1 shade.
Okay, so notice if we times the figure number by 2, it keeps increasing by 2, or times by 2. So 2 times 1 for figure 1, we got 2 spaces. Figure 2, there was 4. This one has 6. And then we can see figure 4, if we take the figure number and times it by 2, we know we need to draw 8 spaces here. So I can go ahead and fill in, and I can draw first 4, and then I can put some diagonals here, and now I have 8 spaces. So this section is looking for a pattern, and each one only had one of the sections shaded. So for inductive reasoning, what you're doing here is looking at the pattern that's given, and based on what's happened in the past in the pattern, the conjecture you can come up with to complete the pattern. 1 to 2, 2 now. So now on to 2, 2. Now 2, 2 is logic based, and we're going to see a lot of vocabulary in this lesson. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a conditional statement. And in our conditional statement, it has 2 parts. It has a hypothesis and a conclusion. We will be writing our conditional statements in if-then form. So I have an example here. And my example is, if you study, then you will get an A. Now, the hypothesis is generally always going to follow the word if. And the conclusion will follow the word then. There is an exception to this, and we'll see it later on. But generally, when you're given an if-then statement, the hypothesis is after the word if, and the conclusion, and it's highlighted to show you, the blue is the conclusion, the red is the hypothesis. Also, when we start looking at different notation, the hypothesis will usually be represented by the letter P and the conclusion with the letter Q. And we're going to see some arrows and some different notation. Not now, but later on we will see this. Now, when you're given a conditional statement, it doesn't necessarily have to be true. It could be a false statement. So in this particular example, and we can apply it to yesterday's test, it says, if you study, then you will get an A. Now, this is not necessarily true, because what if you made some careless mistakes and you miss an A by 1 point, you could end up with a B, or even lower than that, depending on how many careless mistakes you made. So generally, though, if you study, you will get an A, but it's not always the case. So this would be a false statement. The next vocabulary here is the negation of a statement. So the negation of a statement is just the opposite of the original statement. Generally, what will happen is they're going to either add in the word not or take the word not out. Now, keep in mind, sometimes our sentences or our conditional statements grammatically will not sound right if we just throw in the word not. But in these two examples, we're going to just either insert the word not or take it out. So in example 1, my original statement is, it is raining. To state the opposite of that, we would say, it is not raining. And that would be the negation. If it's already has the word not in it, like example 2 here, and it says the shirt is not red, the opposite of that would be the shirt is red. So when you negate the statement, we're basically stating the opposite. Next vocabulary word is converse. And we can form the converse by changing the order of the hypothesis and conclusion. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch it. The hypothesis will now become the conclusion, and the conclusion becomes the hypothesis. So they switch places. So notice my original statement, my hypothesis of the original was, if you study, and the conclusion, you will get an A, is now, the conclusion now becomes the hypothesis, and the conclusion, and vice versa, then you studied. So they're switching places. So the hypothesis of the original becomes the conclusion of the second one. And then the conclusion becomes the hypothesis. So they're switching places. That is the converse. So on your quiz on Tuesday, I might give you original conditional, an original if-then statement, and I may ask you to negate it. I may ask you to write the converse. I'm going to probably ask you to write the inverse, which is the next slide, and also the contrapositive. So you need to keep all these terms straight. The next vocab word is an inverse. And for the inverse, it's going to be formed by negating both the hypothesis and the conclusion. So again, your original statement, if you study, then you will get an A. So notice this is where the grammar is going to come into play. I'm not going to state, if you not study, then you not get an A. That doesn't sound proper. So instead, I'm going to say, to negate it or to write the inverse, I'm going to say, if you didn't study. That sounds better than if you not study. Okay, so you have to make proper English here. So if you didn't study, then you didn't get an A. So the inverse is negating or writing the opposite of both the hypothesis and the conclusion. When we did the inverse, so negate it means to make it the opposite. So here my statement said, if you study, then you will get an A. So to negate that and make it the inverse, we're going to say, if you didn't study, then you didn't get an A. Now the one that has the most work, and it's the biggest word, contrapositive. So to form the contrapositive, we are going to first write the converse, and then we're going to negate both the hypothesis and the conclusion. So it's got the most work. Now, if you'd rather negate and then converse, either way. But no, you got to flip it, and you also have to negate it. So we're flipping and negating for the contrapositive.
What is negating again?
Negate is where we write the opposite. So back here, all right, so back to the contrapositive. So again, it's formed by writing the converse and then negating both the hypothesis and the conclusion, so you make them the opposite. So my original statement here is if you study, then you will get an A. To write the converse, you flip. So instead we will say if you got an A, then you studied, and then the contrapositive, the final, would be to add in the negation. So if you didn't get an A, then you didn't study. So again, for the contrapositive, you're going to flip and negate. Let's see what's next. False statements. So an if-then statement is false if an example could be found for which the hypothesis is true, but the conclusion is false. And when we find that example that proves it false, that is called a counterexample. So for my if-then statement, here's my statement. It says, if you live in Florida, then you live in Miami. Is that a true statement? No. Can someone give me a counterexample of living in Florida but not living in Miami? Okay, living in Broward County or any other city or county in Florida. So your counterexample would be, like he said, living in Broward, living in Orlando, living in Tallahassee. Any city in Florida would have proved that statement false. You're in Florida, but not necessarily in Miami. Make sense? So this is how you would prove a statement false, by coming up with one, all you need is one example to prove it, that it's not true. Let's say we said, if you are on the football team, then you are the quarterback. Is that a true statement? No. Okay. Can someone give me a counterexample?
Running back?
Good. So if you're on the football team, then you're the running back. Any other position on the football team would have proven that one false. Now we could say it the other way, and that statement would have been true. We could have said, if you are the quarterback, then you're on the football team.
That would be the converse.
No, this would be the converse of that, and then that would have been true. So sometimes the conditional could be false, but the converse could be true. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So you just have to be careful how it's written. Okay? All right. Let's go ahead and see the next slide. So a biconditional statement is if the conditional statement and its converse are both true, then we could rewrite the statement as a biconditional. And we're going to add in the words if and only if. So when we have our statement, we're going to take out the if, we're going to take out the word then, and where this comma is located, we're going to insert the words if and only if. Now, the only way we can do this is if both the original statement and its converse are true. So the first thing we need to do is take a look at our statement and decide, is my original statement here a true statement? So my original statement here is, if an angle has a measure of 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. Is that true?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Now we're going to state the converse, and we're going to check to see if that's true. Remember to state the converse. This is where we're going to switch the order. So the conclusion becomes the hypothesis, and the hypothesis becomes the conclusion. So my converse is going to be, if an angle is a right angle, then it has a measure of 90 degrees. Is that true? Yes, it is. So because both statements are true, I can now go back and write a biconditional statement. Now, I have options here. I can either write my biconditional off of the original or off of the converse. It doesn't matter. So let me go ahead and do it off the original. So again, when I do it off the original, I'm taking out the if, the then, and then where the comma is, I'm inserting the words if and only if. So let's go ahead and write the biconditional. We're going to say an angle has a measure of 90 degrees, and here's my comma, so I'm going to put in if and only if it is a right angle. So this is based off the original statement. I took out the word if, I took out the word then, I took out the comma, and put in the words if and only if. Now I can do the exact same thing with the converse statement. So again, this time, I'm going to use this. Again, I'm going to take out the word if. I'm going to take out the word then. There should have been a comma there. So I could say now, an angle is a right angle if and only if it has a measure of 90 degrees. That's it. That's how you write a biconditional statement. And again, you can choose to write it off of the original or the converse. But again, remember, the original statement must be true and the converse have to be true. So you need to make sure you understand what a conditional statement is, what it means to negate a statement, to write the converse, to write the inverse, to write the contrapositive. Because on the quiz, I'm going to give you maybe an original if-then statement, and then I'm going to ask you to write, say, the contrapositive or the inverse. It'll be give you instructions to do that, and you need to understand what do you need to do for each type. All right, some examples now. So it says, here's my conditional, my original statement. If you attend AMHS, then you wear an ID. Okay, it says, using the above statement, identify the hypothesis and the conclusion. I'm just going to highlight. So I'm going to highlight my hypothesis in red. Again, remember the hypothesis is going to follow the word if. So my hypothesis is going to be, you attend AMHS. My conclusion is going to follow the word then, and it's you wear an ID. Now, more than likely on the quiz, this could be a question where I give you the original statement, and now part B, you would have to list or write out the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. And again, once we state that converse, if it asks us to write a biconditional, we have to make sure that they're both true. But let's go ahead and first do the converse of this original statement. Remember, to write the converse, we switch the order. So let's go ahead and switch the order. So instead of saying if you attend AMHS, then you wear an ID, instead we're going to say if you wear an ID, then you attend AMHS. That would be the converse. I'm doing part B here. So remember, for the converse, you switch the order. Next, I'll do the inverse. For the inverse, we're going to add in the opposite, or add in the nots. So again, I'm not going to put in if you not attend AMHS. I'm going to make it sound grammatically correct. So for my inverse, I'm going to say if you don't or do not attend AMHS, then you don't wear an ID. And that's your inverse. Next, they want me to state the contrapositive. So remember, for the contrapositive, we flip it and negate it. It's the biggest word. So for the contrapositive, I'm going to flip the original. So really, I'm taking my converse and negating it. So if you don't wear an ID, then you don't attend AMHS. That is your contrapositive. You're taking that green converse and negating it. Part C wants to know if the green converse that I wrote there is a false statement. If it is, give me a counterexample. So it says, the green converse there says, if you wear an ID, then you attend AMHS. Is that true? No. Can someone give me a counterexample? Anybody else know anything else where they have an ID? Michael?
Like another school?
Good. Another school. A student at another school. So another school. Another one? Heritage, okay? You could say Heritage. You could say St. Thomas. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a school. It could be a hospital. A lot of hospitals, they have to wear IDs. So it could also be a teacher here at AMHS, because I don't go here as a student. I work here. So any example where somebody wears an ID, but they're not at AMHS. So that would be your counterexample.
So if you work at a hospital and you wear an ID, would that be the converse?
Yes, that would be the example. Say another school, working at a hospital, any place that they wear an ID. Okay, so here it says to rewrite the pair of conditionals as a biconditional. So I have my first conditional here. And then here's the other one. Okay, so it says here to rewrite this as a biconditional. So again, remember, it doesn't matter if I use the original conditional or its converse to rewrite this. Remember, for the biconditional, we're going to take out the words if and then we're going to insert the words if and only if. Now, shorthand version or shortcut version for if and only if, you can write IFF. So IFF would be like shortcut for, or abbreviation for if and only if. So let's go ahead and write it based on the red. Yes.
Sorry.
Okay, so let me write the statement based on the red conditional. I can either do it off of the red or the blue. So I'm going to do red first. So again, you're taking out the word if, and you're going to write M is between L and N if and only if LM plus MN equals LN. That would be your biconditional. Now, if you don't want to abbreviate it, you're going to write out the words if and only if. Now, I can also write my biconditional based off of the blue. So again, if I write it off of the blue, I would write LM, let me do it in blue, LM plus MN equals LN if and only if M is between L and N. So again, take out if, take out then, where the comma is, insert if and only if. And again, remember, both the conditional and its converse have to be true in order to write it as a biconditional. So both of these are biconditionals. This one was based off the original red. This was based off the converse. And again, either one would be a correct answer. This lesson has a lot of vocabulary, so make sure you understand. For example, if I ask you to write a conditional, if I ask you to write the converse, inverse, contrapositive, or a biconditional. So make sure you understand what all those terms mean and how you turn them in to those types of if-then statements. Okay, so your homework for this section is only the 2-2 PDF that's there. You do not need to complete the 2-1, just the 2-2. When you come into class tomorrow, you're going to do the 2-2 warm-up. We'll go over that warm-up and then these homework answers, and then tomorrow we'll learn 2-3.